Welcome to the IEEE-HKN podcast, Career Conversations. My name is Amy Jones, and I'm a member of the HKN Young Alumni Team, a group of young engineers and computer scientists navigating our own career and sharing our conversations about work, life, family, and having it all. I'll be the host of today's episode. Our guest today is Haley DeGreve, who is a communication specialist and a 2020 graduate of Augustana College, where she earned a bachelor's degree in marketing and communication studies. Throughout her education, she was inspired to start a mental health awareness and suicide prevention nonprofit called the Gray Matters Collective in 2018. The collective became a movement filled with hope, support, and healing for thousands, becoming a nationally recognized movement through the University of Michigan Depression Center. Since she began mental health advocacy in 2018, she's spoken at many local schools, events, and workplaces to advocate against mental health stigma and educate crises intervention. In the past 2 years alone, she has spoken to over 50,000 people globally on the topic. She also launched a podcast called Surviving the Suck, generating conversations about the reality of mental illness and surviving hardship. This podcast was recently ranked in the top 10% globally on topics related to mental health and suicide. As founder and president of the Gray Matters Collective, Haley has been trained in Mental Health First Aid USA, the Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and is a Make It Okay ambassador through Iowa's Healthiest State initiative. In March 2020, she gave a TEDx talk on mental health, suicide prevention, and the power of community. Most importantly, she continues to fight each day to prevent suicide and hopes to change the world one person at a time. Haley, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really, really grateful to be here.
Now, before we get started, I do want to mention that today's episode touches on topics like suicide and mental health. So, for those listening, please use discretion. So, Haley, I'm so excited to talk to you today because personally, over the last several years, with all of the different crises that the world has been encountering, I have felt like my personal mental health is a lot more precarious than it has ever been. But at the same time, the workplace is one of the last places that I feel like talking about my mental health. But I spend 8+ hours a day there. So I'm really excited to talk to you a little bit about how we, as HKN members, as engineers, and as young professionals, can support ourselves and each other in this journey with mental health. So, to start off, can you tell me a little bit about how you first became passionate about mental health?
Absolutely, yes. And just a little caveat, even before I dive into all of this, I want to let everyone know, for many different reasons, that I'm not a psychologist, but I wouldn't even consider myself an expert in this space. But when you're someone with lived experience of mental health issues and um, being in the nonprofit space and taking mental health trainings, you learn how to communicate on this. And I just want to let everyone know that if you're listening throughout this episode and you're thinking, gosh, she's doing a lot of stuff for mental health and I could never do that. I want you to know I've never taken a psychology class and I can still talk on this topic and so can you. So, just a caveat there. But, diving into this, it kind of relates to my story actually, because growing up, I have noticed that I've always had anxiety issues. I was kind of that kid that, little things would happen throughout the day and I'd feel myself start to, the feelings of anxiety start to intensify. And I knew something was kind of off with me, but it really got worse when I went into my middle school years. I was bullied pretty intensely. I didn't have a lot of friends, and that isolation was really hard for me. And I noticed that I was feeling more depressed, feeling more anxious, but I didn't really know how to express that. And so I made a friend outside of school, and she was actually my neighbor. She lived across the street from me, and she attempted to take her life twice. And I was the one who, at 12 years old, got to her, was, able to call the ambulance, was able to get her the help that she needed. And I remember being 12, 13 years old and thinking to myself, we are really young to be experiencing this. Like I knew it wasn't normal, but at the same time, the thoughts of suicide, the thoughts of depression plagued me as well. So it was normal in my world. But when that happened, I remember thinking, wow, I almost lost my best friend at 12 years old. So it was kind of surreal for me. And throughout my life, especially what this would have been, gosh, 15-ish years ago, longer than that, I guess. I, mental health and suicide wasn't talked about like it is now. We're starting to get better, but we still have a long ways to go. But at that point, I really didn't think that I could do anything to help anyone. And so I kind of went through my own journey. And when I went to college, I was struggling a lot more just because of some traumatic events that had happened in my life. And I was really struggling with PTSD and I didn't even know it. And so I actually ended up taking advantage of my school's counseling sessions, the free 12 sessions that we got. So I went and sought therapy for the first time in my life, and I didn't tell anyone. I was scared to tell my family. I was scared to tell my friends because of the stigma, because I was scared of, them saying to me, "Well, what kind of issues do you have in your life? You've got so much going for you." And so I went to therapy, and it was the first time that anyone had actually known what I was going through because I shared it, and also to feel validated in it, to know that it wasn't necessarily about me, it was more about what was going on in my brain, and that your brain's connected to your physical health. So just as physical health is health, so is mental health. And to me, that was a game changer. So I finally got the help that I needed. I went on a long journey, but even through that period of therapy, it was a lot of ups and downs. And I was diagnosed with bipolar depression, anxiety disorder, PTSD, and I struggled with self harm for many years. And it was something that led me to a point of being suicidal and actively having thoughts and planning out a plan for suicide. And that was the scariest moment of my life because I didn't even know that I was on this downward spiral myself. People had inklings, but it wasn't until a friend of mine, literally the night that I was planning to take my own life, called me completely out of the blue and just said, "I haven't heard from you in a while and I was really concerned about you." And that phone call saved my life. And this person wasn't a psychologist, isn't an expert, but that phone call saved my life. And when I think back on that, I think, that person just called to check in, and how that completely saved my life. So what can I do for someone else? How can I check in? How can I turn around? And that's how my nonprofit, the Gray Matters Collective, got started. Was we have to do more. We have to educate people on this stuff so that no one ends up in the places where I've been, but also no one ends up in the places of losing their life to suicide. Because I've had friends that have lost their lives to this, and I don't want to see that for anyone else ever again. So that's kind of how the journey and the passion got started.
That's first off, thank you so much for sharing that with us. One of the things that I hear a lot or feel a lot when I think about mental health is how isolating it can be when you're in the middle of an anxious moment or in the middle of a depression. And so I'm really excited to talk to you about how we as a community can support each other. Um, One thing that stood out to me as you were talking about your background, do you think that our conversation around mental health as a society has changed over time? You talked a lot about how it felt very secretive when you started therapy. Do you think that's different now?
I think we are getting there, but I also still think we've got a long ways to go. I think the stigma has changed. I think the stigma is still alive, but it's different now. The stigma used to be, don't talk about mental health. It's not okay to cry. It's not okay to talk about what you're going through. I think as a society, we are actually doing better at that, at least from my perspective. However, I would also argue there's almost this different stigma now where it's more about, hey, I'm online and on social media, and TikTok says I have ADHD, so that means I have ADHD. And you're not actually seeking a professional, but that's just your diagnosis. And although I think those things can help you identify the symptoms and the signs of what you might be experiencing, but it's really important to get a professional involved, because if you get into medication without, talking to a professional, and you might be misdiagnosed, then you're messing with brain chemistry and it changes a lot of things. So there's kind of this weird stigma now where it's almost this romanticization of mental health issues. Instead of normalizing, it's becoming romanticized. And we have to be careful about that, because we have to talk about these issues open and honestly, but we want to be careful to not, make it attractive, which might sound weird, but we don't want people to be depressed. We don't want people to be anxious. And so, we have to be careful about how we go about that conversation. But I do think we're getting better. However, another thing that I would add on to that is we are really getting comfortable about talking about mental health. But I think when it comes to mental illness and it comes to suicide, we still do not talk about those things. And those are the things that really need to be talked about, because when suicide is the second leading cause of death for a 10-year-old in America, that is not okay. When I think about the statistics, and I think about, a 10-year-old or 15-year-old in America, um, being more likely to die by suicide than any other disease or illness, that to me says we have to talk about these things. And when you sweep something under a rug, it's only going to make for a bumpy floor. So why are we not just unveiling this? When I think about, I can't name one presidential debate where it's ever been discussed on a national level. I can't tell you the states that are giving funding to mental health resource centers, or the suicide hotline, or resources that are concrete and real that we all need. And so I think people are starting to understand it's more of an issue. The awareness piece is really good, but I think the action piece is where we're lacking. So I'm hopeful that as a society we will start to band together over this and start to say, okay, now we understand it, but now we have to take a step forward and actually, get action behind this, because that's where we're really going to save lives, and that's what matters the most to me.
I really love the idea of awareness as the first step in a process.
Mhm.
And it feels like that's where a lot of attention is being given. You mentioned social media. I think we've all maybe seen TikTok videos where
Yeah,
it's talking about how you might have autism or you might have ADHD. But really moving towards action, I think, is a fantastic goal.
absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about what maybe some of our membership can do on that action. So, thinking about the people that we're really trying to talk to in this podcast, we're thinking about young adults who are maybe making big transitions in their life, moving from college or graduate school into the workplace. And we know that that time is filled with a lot of transitions. You might be moving, living away from family for the first time, lots of big relationship changes in your life, plus all of the pressure of trying to figure out how to be an adult. So, are there common struggles with mental health that people should be watching out for during these big transitions in their lives? And how would they know when they need to maybe reach out and get help?
That is a great question, because there are a lot of common themes that I often see with anyone who's going through a big transition. It's different stress that maybe you haven't dealt with before. I actually just have a friend, the same friend who tried to take her life a few times when we were little. She's still in my life today, which is fantastic. But she's been struggling recently with, the post college depression. Moving out of the college days, and even when I graduated college, it was May of 2020. So it was during COVID, and I struggled a lot with not only just the pandemic, the lack of social interaction, and then also trying to figure out, okay, I have to find a full-time job, I have to find a house. Like, there are so many stressors that come with these big life transitions. And so what I want to say with that is that if you're experiencing any kind of off-putting symptoms, or maybe you already have a mental health issue that's being amplified because of these additional stressors, have grace with yourself, because transitioning into anything new is scary and it's hard, and you have to give yourself grace, and you have to prioritize your mental health too. So for me, during, different life transitions that I've went through in my life, whether they've been traumatic life transitions or they've been healthy ones that I still struggled with, both of those, you have to give yourself grace. But you also have to take a step back and really identify what you're going through, name it, claim it. So for me, there would be days where I wasn't okay, and I called it the suck. It's like, okay, I'm in the suck today. And then get people involved in that. So ask for help. And I know that that sounds really cliche, and it's thrown around a lot, but for me, that was really hard to tell my friends and my family, hey, I'm struggling with this. All my college friends are gone and I can't find a job, and I'm struggling to be a functioning adult in the world when I just graduated college, and they kind of slingshot you out of there like, "Hey, be free, have fun," and it's like, "Oh my gosh, like there's so many things I need to do and it's stressful." And And we don't realize how much stress can really impact our mental health too. So, ask for help. Really, really look to the people around you, the good people around you, and tell them, hey, I'm in the suck today and I need someone to pull me out of it. Or, I can only give 10%. Can you help give me that 90%? Just having the right people around you, because they say you're the average of the five people you surround yourself with. And I think about that in a mental health context a lot, because I used to surround myself with really negative people who didn't understand mental health, didn't know how to help me. And even when I communicated that, there wasn't the willingness to help. And so I had to transition. I just had to switch playgrounds, find new playmates. And now that I have friends who, okay, they know what to do, they are positive, they try to always look out for signs for me, that has been a game changer. So I think sometimes when you're going through, these big life transitions, you have to have grace with yourself, ask for help, know that it's okay if you're not always perfect or productive or on that day. Like, it's okay to have bad days, and just to know, you don't have to stay there though. So, get the help that you need if you need it. But most importantly, always put your mental health first, because if your mental health isn't right, you're not going to be able to function later on down the road. It can be a slippery slope. So putting those precautions in place is huge.
I really love the idea of giving yourself grace. As somebody who's been out of college for many years now, um, one of the things I find kind of comical is that I don't think any of us ever really feel like we're adults. We all kind of feel like ourselves, and you look around and you're like, where's all the functioning grown-ups?
Yeah, right.
And so the idea of just remembering that everybody has to learn how to do this. And at the time when you're making these big transitions, you're learning a lot. And
Mhm.
that's a lot of stress, a lot of change, and all of those things can have an impact on our mental health. So, a
Absolutely.
really wonderful tip there.
Yeah,
So, let's transition a little bit into talking about specifically the workplace and the office. Um, One of the challenges that I mentioned a little bit earlier is that as difficult as it is to reach out to people in your life for help, I think it's easier to reach out to like a spouse or a partner rather than reaching out to like a coworker or a supervisor. So maybe to ground us a little bit, can you talk a little bit about mental health in the workplace? How does the workplace impact our mental health, and what are maybe some key principles that we should be thinking about?
absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. I will tell you, for a long time, I did not talk about my mental health at work. It just was something that I didn't feel the need to. I actually hid the fact that I had a nonprofit based on mental health for years, because I was scared that if people knew that I had mental illness, that I would be seen as not capable of the work I was doing, or that people would treat me differently, or it would affect my long-term career. And
Hmm.
what I found is, over the years, the wisdom that I've gained from my experiences is, when I walk through the doors of an office, or when I open the laptop to get on calls or whatever it is for work every day, my mental health issues don't shut off. Like, this is something that I live with every day. And so when we talk about bringing your whole self to work, that includes the things that are part of me. My mental health issues don't define me, but they refine me. So it's part of who I am. So when I say that, it's brought into my day-to-day work, it's brought into the meetings, and there are times that I am struggling and I have to ask for help from coworkers, and it's often a very difficult conversation. But in terms of the workplace, there's kind of this new wave of professionalism, because we kind of had an idea of what professionalism was before COVID. And I think COVID really stirred things up in a good way, in terms of mental health. We finally are starting to talk about it. But at work, you know, the professional that we had before is different. Now, the professional is, everyone's exhausted, everyone's just trying to make it day by day and kind of survive here. So, how do we just remember at work that we're all human? And I've talked to even some of my coworkers about this. If I had diabetes, or I had some kind of physical health issue that I needed to tell my manager because it was affecting my work, I probably wouldn't have as big of an issue telling my manager about that. But when it comes to mental health, it's that stigma, it's that wall of fear of, well, if I tell my manager this, they might not think that I'm capable of the work that I'm doing. And if anything, I found that being vulnerable and honestly, even just bluntly saying it sometimes and just saying, hey, I have depression and I literally cannot function right now and I need a mental health day or whatever it is. I found that that kind of honesty and that truth has been received extremely well. Rather than if I just hide it and I'm trying to manage everything and then I end up in a spot that I really don't want to be in. I found that that honesty can really help me in the long term in the workplace. So I've tried really hard to let people know, like, hey, this is something that I deal with every day, and it's not anything that I need to be ashamed about. And I will tell you, there are some people who still just don't understand, and people
Mhm.
who maybe never will, and that's okay. It's something that we're working on as a society, but in the workplace, we have to get to the place where it's okay to talk about it openly and honestly, because LinkedIn, they came out with a commercial it was like, I think it was this past year, but they one of the statements that they had in this commercial I really liked is they said, "Healing your inner child is professional. Taking care of your mental health is professional. Self-care is professional." And so what that those statements made me do was take a step back and look at my own professional life and think, okay, here's the deal. If I actually get the help that I need and I take care of my mental health at work, I will actually be a better employee. Like, I actually will be happier and healthier in my job because it's not just about getting help, it's about living a happy, healthy, successful, well life. And that includes in the work. And Amy, you actually said it. We're at work for however many hours a day, and how many hours in your life you have to be happy and you have to be well there. So hiding it isn't going to be good for you in the long run. Even though it's extremely hard to speak up, I found that I just did it. I literally just one day just sat down with my manager and was like, "This is what's going on." It's kind of like word vomit, but my manager was like, "Oh, like I had no idea. Now I know how I can actually help you, and let's talk about this." So sometimes it just takes those hard conversations, but it helps you in the long run. And if you don't even know where to begin with that, pull in someone that you're comfortable with or someone that you do trust at your job, and maybe talk to them first. Just because sometimes you have to take those steps, and you don't have to see the full staircase, but just take that first step.
Such great advice. So I'm also really glad you brought that up as somebody who's been a supervisor. I think a lot of the people who go into management and who go into leadership, and for those of us who have aspirations to management and leadership, we want to help and we go in there because we care about people. And so sometimes one of the kindest things I think that you can do for your boss is to be open with them about what you need and what you're struggling with. Because I think just looking around our workplace, I think most people have honestly good intentions and want to do something that helps us all to bring our full selves to work. So, one of the things that you mentioned is that maybe starting with maybe a trusted coworker or somebody who you feel a connection with. For those of us who might be that trusted coworker, what are some things that you would recommend if somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, I'm having issues. I need some help."
Yeah, yeah. And I'm gonna take a lot of expertise and advice that I've gotten from a lot of the mental health trainings I've done on this, and even trainings that are involving in the workplace conversations. It often is hard when you're the person that someone comes to and they, very candidly and honestly talk about their mental health, because what I found is in those situations, at least for me, sometimes my brain shuts down because I feel like, oh my gosh, how do I help this person? It's kind of one of those awkward sometimes conversations that you might not really know how to react, or it might be new to you. So I always tell people, take a deep breath, just kind of let your brain kind of focus, listen non-judgmentally, just, let them know that they're safe, that they're loved. And, depending on how extreme the situation can go. If you're someone that, a coworker comes to you and says, "Hey, I'm really struggling with my depression. I'm not suicidal, but I just have been really having some dark thoughts and I'm having trouble getting out of bed and getting to work." Something that I would respond with that is, "Okay, is there anything I can do to help? What do you need?" And those questions I think are important because you're putting the focus on them and letting them know, I'm here for you, but what do you need? What can I do? And sometimes people will tell you, I don't really know. And sometimes those questions you really have to just kind of guide and say, okay, well, when you talk about feeling this darkness, what's that like for you? What does help you? And, just really trying to dig deep and not hammering them with questions by any mean, but just having a conversation, listening, listening to understand, not just to respond. I think that's huge too, is really listening to understand where they're coming from. And, if you feel like it gets to a point where you have to ask that hard question, that if you really believe someone's really, really struggling, know that it's okay to ask the question, are you struggling with suicidal thoughts? And if they say yes, don't freak out. Don't, just stay calm and just say, okay, I'm really glad you shared that with me. Thank you. Do you have a plan? And if they say yes, then it's really time to say, okay, I'm really concerned about you. Would you feel comfortable with me talking to your manager about this? I'll come with you. Nothing extreme is going to happen, but we need to get other people involved just for your safety and your well being. Just the other night, I had someone in my life that I don't work with at work, but we're involved in a volunteer setting together, reached out to me and she said, hey, I'm really struggling and I don't know what to do. And I just said, are you struggling with suicidal thoughts? And she actually said, yeah, and I actually just took a bottle of pills and I'm scared. I don't know what to do. And so I called her and I said, I just want you to know I'm going to have to call 911 because out of, mm, you know, fear for your safety right now, like we need to get professionals involved. And she was actually really thankful for that because who knows what would have happened if, I just kind of would have brushed it aside or, just didn't even initiate that conversation. And so, um, sometimes you just never know where people are. And it's really important to check in on people around you, even if you don't know, even if they seem like they're happy or they might not be struggling, just to check in on the strong people too, because they might be masking it really well. So, in terms of the workplace, if you have someone who comes to you and they're talking about mental health, just really, really try to understand where they're coming from. And if you feel, especially in your gut, you feel like you need to get other people involved, just let them know through that process. Don't leave them blindsided. I think that's one of the worst things you can do
Mhm.
is when you're talking to someone who's already struggling and then you kind of surprise them with, hey, I talked to your manager about this and they weren't comfortable with that. It really does take a conversation. And I found 99% of the time that I've had these conversations with even my own coworkers, they came to me and disclosed to me because they needed and wanted help. And even if at the time they're not super happy about talking to their manager about it or aren't super happy about getting certain people involved, in the long run, they will come back and thank you. And they will say, I'm really glad that you reached out, or you did this and that for me and with me because I needed it that time. So, it's just really important that you use your best judgment and honestly, one of the best things you can do, whether it's in the workplace or anywhere for that matter, if you really are in a situation that you do not know if you should get other people involved or you don't know if you should even call, for extra help, professional help, you can always call the suicide hotline for other people. So I tell a lot of my coworkers this: if you're talking with someone and you don't really know what to do, you can call the suicide hotline and they're experts and they will just guide you on what to do. They will help you understand the situation, especially if you're not an expert and you don't really know where to go or what to do. They're there 24/7. It's free. It's available, confidential, and that number is now 988. So you can call at any point, and that's just a great resource to have in and out of the workplace too.
I wish there were more areas of my life where there was a free and confidential hotline that would guide me through difficult
Right?
situations.
I
Uh,
know. I know.
we'll make sure to link that down in the show notes in case anybody wants to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
So, one other thing that, as you're talking about what to do if somebody comes and asks you or needs some help. I kept going back to your earlier point about giving yourself grace and making sure that you're taking care of yourself too.
Hmm.
It can be a heavy thing when somebody needs help and comes to you for help. And it's absolutely something that I think we all want to do, but do remember to take care of yourself afterwards.
Oh, yes. Yeah, you got to have a plan for yourself too, because if you're on a plane, and the plane's going down, they advise you to put your breathing mask on first, because if you're not well, alive, and responsive, you're not going to be able to help anyone else. And for me, that's the same case with mental health. Your mental health has to be um, right and well in order to help someone else. So I have to keep that in mind, knowing that I have mental illness, and a lot of people disclose to me a lot. And so if someone comes to you and you are not in the mental capacity to handle that conversation, just be honest and say, "Hey, I actually am not in the mental space to have this kind of conversation, but I'm going to give you some resources, and I'm going to actually pull in someone else who is able to help." Just because if you aren't okay, you got to take care of yourself first. So I'm really glad you brought that up because it's true.
Excellent. Well, thinking about moving from individual action to maybe more collective action, do you have any ideas for people who want to advocate for mental health awareness within their workplace, maybe on a larger level?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's power in stories, there's power in courage, and there's power in people coming together around a topic. There is truly power in community. So if you're someone that you're feeling drawn to do something, I always say you're being drawn if it bothers you. If the mental health problem in America, if the suicide issue bothers you, you're probably being drawn to change it. And so if this conversation the whole time you're like, wow, I didn't know that this was an issue, and I want to do something, the first place you can really start is talk to people about it. Figure out how you can get involved, whether it's in the workplace, out of the workplace, whatever it is. Get involved with a local nonprofit, or even at work, start something, right? Like where I work, we started an employee resource group to get people together to tell these stories and to elevate that courage and start to promote the resources. I think that's one thing that is super helpful, is just get the resources in front of people, show people that there is help available and there is hope available. That's huge. So I always say start there. Make sure that you're in the right place mentally to do that, because when you start mental health awareness and suicide prevention, if you're not ready for those conversations, it can kind of be heavy and taxing. So make sure you're taking care of yourself. But if you feel like you're in a place where you're like, yeah, I want to do something, like I said at the beginning of this, you don't have to be an expert. You can learn, through your own avenues. You can take trainings. You can learn through lived experience and helping others. And once you kind of know how to help, you really start to see just how much of a difference your voice can make. And using your voice is amazing. So whether that's through an employee resource group, maybe you can do lunch and learns where you bring in a speaker, or maybe even someone from your company to share their own experiences, or maybe it's a panel that you bring in different people from your community, and they just openly discuss this, because like we talked about, that awareness piece is key. People need to understand what they don't understand or what they don't know. And a lot of times with mental health, a lot of people just don't know enough about it to feel like they're comfortable enough to even share. So doing things like that, but then really finding that action piece. So maybe you're involved in a local group, or maybe it's through, your community, and you're thinking, hey, we've got this awareness piece down, but now we want to have a walk to fight suicide, and we're going to raise money for a local, center that helps people who struggle with suicidal thoughts. Or maybe we're going to start a fund for people who can't afford therapy. Just different things like that. Just really, really figuring out where you can make a difference, and if there's an area within mental health that is important to you. Because when I started this, it was like, wow, I mental health touches everything, and a lot of times it's it can be long term, episodic, temporary. So where am I finding my biggest passions? And for me, I really found that suicide prevention was what I was extremely drawn to, and wanting to learn more about suicide. So I feel more called to that. And some people, it's strictly mental health. They're like, I just want to talk about well being. I want to talk about your physical health and mental health and emotional health, and that's great. We need people on all areas. So whether you're passionate about eating disorders or whatever it might be, you know, really hone into that and figure out how can I make a difference and how can I start and talk to people about it, because people have ideas for you that maybe you've never thought about, and research too, because that's huge.
I really love those ideas, especially because, as you mentioned initially, even something as simple as a phone call or a check in can make a difference. So, in
Yeah,
your workplace, if you feel called to start with like a flyer in the bathroom with how to access therapy through your work's insurance, all the way up to creating a fund or starting an employee resource group, there's a whole spectrum there. But the
yeah,
important thing is that if you feel really called to this, that you do something, that you take action.
absolutely. Yeah, Mother Teresa said, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. And I that has always stuck with me. Maybe it starts there. Maybe you go home and you start these conversations with your family or your friends before you even bring it into the workplace. Sometimes just talking about it. And you can even use this podcast episode. Just say, "Hey, I listened to this podcast episode on mental health, and it was so fascinating." And that opens up a door, because when you open up the door to the conversation about mental health, you will be amazed at what people share, that maybe they weren't comfortable sharing before because they didn't know how to bring it up. So
Mm.
I love that you said that, Amy, because it's very important.
Well, and those deeper relationships are so valuable and so rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Haley, what final thoughts would you like our listeners to take away from this conversation?
There are always so many thoughts I could share. I could talk about this for hours, but I'll spare you. I'll spare you of that. I think something that is always extremely important for me to share is that when you take a step back and you look at the mental health problem, you look at the suicide problem in our world, you start to feel really small. And you start to feel like, how could I ever make a difference? And there's a story that I always tell that I think helps with this. And it's about an old man who's walking along a beach, and he sees this little girl, and she's kind of running up and down the beach frantically. And as the old man gets closer, he realizes that hundreds of starfish had washed up along the shore. The little girl's trying to save each one before they dry out. So the old man walks up to the little girl. He says, "Little girl, you're wasting your time. You won't make a difference. You can't save all the starfish. So you should just give up and you should quit and you should go home." And the little girl picks up a starfish, looks at the old man, throws it into the ocean, and says, "But I made a difference to that one." And I love that story because even if just starting today, you can try to make a difference to one more person, that can change that person's world. Even if that person is you, even if you're someone that you need the extra help and you don't know where to begin, start that conversation for yourself. Be the starfish thrower for yourself. And even if you feel like, you know what, I'm okay today, I'm feeling pretty good, then go do something nice for someone else, whether it's a compliment, hold the door open for someone, or maybe it's even going beyond and starting that conversation because you're worried about them, checking in. Just do one thing that you can be really proud of, and you will change the world one person at a time.
That's such a beautiful and a profound truth.
Yeah.
Haley, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a really educational, impactful conversation for me, and I'm really grateful you took the time to do it.
Thank you for having me.
If anyone would like to learn more about the Gray Matters Collective, you can find them online at thegraymatterscollective.com. And we're also going to be linking to some of their locations and social media accounts below. So, everyone who's listening, thank you for joining us. Please remember to subscribe to this podcast, visit us on YouTube, and connect with us at hkn.org.